Hey everyone, my fellow seekers of higher knowledge. Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the ordinary states of our waking, our sleeping, and our dreaming states of consciousness? Well, in today's video, we're going to get into some interesting stuff and we're going to embark on a journey through Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's fascinating roadmap of consciousness and human potential. Something that I learned through my master's degree at Maharishi International University in consciousness and human potential and Vedic science. And also through my direct experiences within my meditation, which is a path that leads us to these heights of human potential. And so as we navigate these 7 states, we're going to talk about some really cool and interesting things, some underlying realities of cosmic and unity consciousness and how they hold the key to manifesting our deepest desires. And so if you're new to my channel, I'm John Bertrand. If you're coming back, well, it's great to see you. I'm super pumped to talk about what happens when we awaken the infinite possibilities that are found within each of us. Let's start off by giving consciousness a definition. We've got to do that so that we're on the same page. And so basically, as a baseline, we can say that consciousness, it's the process of being aware of or conscious of something. If we were not conscious, then we'd have no experience of anything, and that'd be pretty crazy. Now, Maharishi, what he did is he formulated this complete science of consciousness that I learned in my master's degree, which I talked about in the intro. In other videos, we're going to get into a lot of information in the topic of manifestation in more detail. But in today's video, we're going to lay the foundations for that higher state of consciousness to have that infused in our being. So let's talk about how Vedic science, how this science of consciousness and human potential, it's super fascinating, how it describes these 7 states of human consciousness, each with its own physiology and also its own corresponding mental experience. And it gives this knowledge, this theoretical knowledge, which is super practical, but also the direct experience of the knowledge for unfolding this full human potential within ourselves. Now, the first 3 states of consciousness are definitely something that we've all experienced and we all understand for sure. The first one is this deep state of sleep, so deep sleep. And this is where our body is in deep rest and there's no memory and there's no conscious awareness. There's nothingness. Now, the second state of consciousness is our dreaming, and this is where our body is also at rest, but we're having imaginary or altered dreaming and this dreamlike mental awareness, this illusionary experience. Now, the third state is the waking state. It's the one type of consciousness that we're all most likely in that we think is the truth of reality. And Maharishi kind of gets to that and saying it's not actually our birthright. We'll call this object referral consciousness. And so most of us, like I mentioned, including myself at the time of this recording at least, live in this state. And so in object referral consciousness, the mind is incredibly preoccupied with external objects, with experiences, and with mental thought. And so it's that I, or that little self, the little I that's perceived as separate from everything that's involved in the process of perceiving and interacting with the external world. And in object referral consciousness, we're not actually conscious aware of our inner being, of our higher self, or we're not aware of our soul, at least not perceptually. And so what I mean is when I say unaware, I mean that we can't see or have any perceptual experience that our soul is in fact here and a part of who we are, and perhaps maybe our soul is who and what we really are. And instead, we have this very strong relationship and identification with the ego. So me, John, this handsome dude looking at you, and who thinks he's wonderful, who thinks he's amazing. And on the flip side, also the guy who, beats himself up in the mirror and who says mean things to himself like, you're stupid, dude. You're lazy. You could do better at YouTube. And this is what we talk about when we mention duality, that sense of separation we experience in the normal waking state, which actually isn't really the normal state of consciousness that we're going to get into in the higher states of consciousness. Now, in the 4th state of consciousness, this is transcendental consciousness, according to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Now it's where things, they definitely start to get interesting. So this is where a person starts experiencing what's referred to as self-referral consciousness. In its simplest form, without getting into all the technical jargon that's unnecessary, this is where the individual meditator, where they close their eyes and they go inside and they have a direct experience of their higher self, of their soul. And so it's where we start to experience our higher self, and we take our mind from the subtle level, from the gross level to the subtler levels of mind when we close our eyes. And it's when we dip our awareness into the unmanifest. In this fourth state, it's self-referral consciousness, so it's different than the object referral consciousness, which means that it's characterized by unbounded awareness, heightened wakefulness, and this deep physiological rest that's experienced in meditation. Now, transcendental consciousness, as I mentioned, it's experienced in meditation practices that they take the mind inward to a state of this pure, silent awareness beyond thought, beyond emotion, and beyond perception. And so what happens is that the mind settles into a silent, blissful silence. It's this restful alertness that's allowing for this deep physiological rest. And it's where this experience of transcendental consciousness, it forms the foundation of higher states of consciousness the more we experience that transcendental consciousness. And so when we dip our mind into the transcendental, into this super consciousness, the more our nervous system becomes infused with this being, we're able to harness all the laws of nature. And this is why we meditate, so that we can close the gap between the higher self and the lower self, so that, when we're not in meditation, we don't lose that unbounded and infinite potential, that unbounded awareness, that creative intelligence that stays with us. And so obviously that helps with manifestation. And in the fourth state, again, transcendental consciousness, it's experienced in meditation. So it's a transient experience when the mind transcends from that gross level of the thinking mind, and the mind begins to settle in, and it begins to experience the more refined levels, the more quieter levels of the mind, and really until the thinking mind is completely left behind. And what's left is the meditator is left with this pure, restful awareness, this bliss that's found beyond the mind, and it's found within the deeper realms of meditation. It's really a beautiful thing. All right, so the fifth state of consciousness is a really interesting one. It's cosmic consciousness, according to the Vedic tradition by Maharishi. Now, cosmic consciousness, again, according to Maharishi, is enlightenment. However, it's not the fullest, most blossom expression of enlightenment. There's other higher states beyond it. But cosmic consciousness is the full-time integration of transcendental consciousness, the full-time integration of super consciousness within the waking, within the dreaming, and within the sleeping states of consciousness that we previously talked about. But also to mention that in the previous state, which is the fourth state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, that's just the experience of pure consciousness, which is temporary in meditation. However, in the fifth state, we'll call it CC, short for cosmic consciousness, is where one's awareness is permanently dwelling in this pure awareness in the field of pure consciousness, all the while the individual is still engaged in activity with constant sensory perception and experience of the material world, of objects and ideas, also even while they're sleeping or dreaming. So it's in this state of CC, of cosmic consciousness, where the physiology, it's so stable, it's so flexible that stress can't even accumulate in the nervous system, which is really cool to think about. So that means that someone in CC, they experience this underlying continuation of unbounded awareness. And in this state, the total potential, this is really, really cool, the total potential of natural law is fully awake in someone's awareness through their eyes looking out. And that means that one's thoughts their speech, their actions are supported by the evolutionary intelligence of natural law. And it's on this basis that the individual really doesn't make mistakes. And when I say doesn't make mistakes, I mean that they don't violate natural law. Rather, what they do is that they bring maximum nourishment to themselves, to society, and to the environment. And in CC, it also has some unique characteristics that sets us apart from the other states of consciousness. In CC, pure consciousness is it's actually capable of witnessing, which means the characteristics of the absolute, the soul, they're not lost in action or within the perception of objects. And so the higher self, the soul, what it does is it's actually the witness of the lower self's action. So Maharishi uses a really cool analogy of a light, or if you think about it like a lamp, being a witness to what's going on in the room. And if you think about it, a lamp, it's not involved in whatever's happening or whatever's taking place in the room. Rather, really what it's doing is it's witnessing the activity in the room. So this means that in CC, in cosmic consciousness, the soul, pure consciousness, super consciousness is a witness to the lower self, a witness to the activity, which has to be really freeing if you think about that, really, really, really freeing. So it's also, if you think about that classic aha moment in the mind that we read about in books, when people like Eckhart Tolle have that realization that the sense of the self, the ego, is actually an illusion and not the true I. What's realized in cosmic consciousness, and this is the most fascinating part, is that who and what we are is the soul, which is eternal, unbounded awareness that never dies. So the other thing to mention though, it's not the highest state of consciousness. It's not the full expression of consciousness and human potential, because there is still a separation between the higher and lower self within the nervous system, which is why there is a sense of witnessing that takes place rather than a full integration of perhaps unity within one's perception. But it is, according to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's tradition, it is enlightenment, which is it's a pretty cool state, the fifth state of consciousness. All right, now we're moving along. We're in the sixth state of consciousness. We call this, or Maharishi calls this, God consciousness. It's an even more refined version of cosmic consciousness. And so in God consciousness, it's not to say it's God's consciousness. It's not to be confused in saying a person has become God. Not at all. It's nothing like that. Really what it's saying is that it's a direct experience, or the person's having a direct experience of the full range of God's creation, which is really fascinating to think about. So that means that a person in GC, in God consciousness, begins to perceive the finest of the relative world, to experience the most refined growth within the heart. This includes the ability to experience the finest levels of feeling, the finest levels of devotion, and ultimately to realize that everything they're perceiving is experienced, everything that's being experienced is God, which is mind blown. So this means that a person's perception in God's consciousness becomes so incredibly refined that a person is able to perceive the finest levels of the relative world on the surface level of the gross material world. So Maharishi, what he did is he often used in a lot of his talks a flower to describe God consciousness. And in the normal waking state, when you take a flower, most of us can only perceive the petals of the flower or the green color within the stem. What we can't perceive is some of the finer levels of it. A person that's developed into God consciousness actually has the ability to perceive the unmanifest levels of the flower on the surface level. And so that means that the sap of the flower and all of those things that would usually take a microscope to see, because they're only able to really be perceived on the subtler layers of creation, someone in in GC, God consciousness, can actually see all of that on the surface level of life. However, I know this is crazy to say, but it's still not the most developed level of consciousness and human potential according to Maharishi. And again, that's because there's still the higher self and the lower self, still a slight separation between the higher self and the lower self, and a little bit more to go to close the gap between the higher self and the lower self in terms of the nervous system and in terms of perception. But nonetheless, God consciousness is pretty cool. All right, so drum roll, please. All right, so the seventh state of higher states of consciousness within consciousness and human potential, according to Maharishi, is unity consciousness, which is really fascinating to think about. It's fascinating to try to perceive with the mind, let alone experience. Let's call it UC. So in UC, again, it's the pinnacle of human evolution. And in this state, everything that the experiencer is experiencing is actually the perception of pure consciousness itself, which is, again, really fascinating. So that means that there's no separation between the higher self and the lower self, or at least the boundaries in terms of the nervous system have become porous. And that means that the realization of the self, of the absolute that was gained in cosmic consciousness, is now realized to be the self of all beings, at least in terms of the perceiver that's in unity consciousness. And so, as I've mentioned, the word dual value means the value of the subject and the value of the object, the relationship between the two. And so that means that the process of knowing that separates the knower from the known, that drops off when the object has the same value of the subject, the knower. And so we're getting a little technical here, but in UC, that separation between the subject and the object, and the process that links them, when we're talking about consciousness, the process of knowing which connects them, it collapses into this unified experience in the perception of the perceiver in UC. And so that means that the person in UC, the evaluation of the objects, the perception by the subject is infinity when a person's in UC, which is really interesting. And so this means that objects of perceptions, they're raised to this value of infinity as the life is now lived in its infinite and full creative potential, which is just super fascinating when I think about it. And so this includes the ability to perceive the unmanifest on the surface level, just as you would in UC. It's just a more advanced level. And what's really cool to note about that is that the unmanifest layers, they're more powerful because there's more creative intelligence there that's teeming within them. And so this means that when a person's living in unity, this means that they're living in harmony with the field of all possibilities, that they're living in alignment with the home of all the laws of nature, the home of natural law. So that means that thoughts, that desires, that actions, they're fulfilled very, very quickly, if not instantaneously. And so not only are those things that the person wants, not only are they good for the individual, the man or the woman, but they're good for all of humanity. So as everyone moves towards higher states, towards unity of consciousness, well, it's going to raise the global consciousness, and it's going to be good for all of humanity. So that's why this stuff is just really, really cool, because it's not a selfish thing. It's a collective thing that's pretty awesome for humanity. All right, so surprise, surprise. There's actually one more surprise that I want to give you, I guess you could say, to share when it comes to consciousness and human potential. So UC, unity consciousness, yes, it's the final state of consciousness, the highest state of consciousness. However, there is one more sub-layer, or I think the better way to say it would be subdivision to the unified puzzle, to unity consciousness. And so according to the Vedic tradition, it's called Brahman. And Brahman is the ultimate experience of consciousness and human potential. It's the fullest expression of unity consciousness. And so you're probably asking, like, what is it? We just talked about the fullest expression. Well, Brahman consciousness is the ultimate state of awareness where everything, and so when I say everything, I mean both the self and the external world is perceived as this unified and interconnected, beyond just the sum of the parts. And I think the greatest way to understand this would be to give you a little bit more detail of what I mean. And Maharishi describes this in a sense of, he says, kind of to imagine a puzzle or parts of a house. And so in a puzzle, unity consciousness is like seeing the completed image and recognizing that each piece of the puzzle, it fits together perfectly, forming a whole. Okay, cool. So in this state, you're primarily perceiving your main focus as part of the self when you're in unity consciousness. So whatever you are directly looking at, you perceive as yourself. And so, however, in Brahman consciousness, again, it takes a step further by seamlessly integrating every single piece, no matter where it is in your perception, as part of your true self. And so, very simply, what this means is that you can see the unity in not only what you're directly looking at, not only what you're directly focusing on, but everything you're simultaneously looking at. So including everything behind what you're looking at, around what you're looking at, and directly focusing on. And so it's like basically like realizing the edges of the puzzle, they don't define it. Instead of defining it, it's instead, it is the entire picture. You're including the spaces between the pieces, they're also a part of you. And so you're seeing the entire picture, not just what you're focusing on, the object of perception, but everything that's in the peripheral background as an expression of self. And so this awareness basically dissolves the perceived boundaries that's fostering a profound experience in the most developed state of unity consciousness. And I believe Maharishi, what he says is that the mind is so used to the object referral consciousness that it takes the mind quite a while, if not it's very rare, to experience Brahman consciousness, because the mind is so hard to perceive what we're talking about. And obviously perceptually thinking about this is like mind-blowing. But in the end, the fullest expression of consciousness of human potential is unity consciousness. In the fullest expression of unity consciousness, according to the Vedic tradition, according to Maharishi, is Brahman. Well, there we have it. Thank you for joining me on this journey as we went through this profound inner journey through Maharishi's 7 states of consciousness, in particular, the higher states of consciousness, including the pinnacle, which is unity consciousness, and that sublayer of Brahman consciousness that I just talked about. So I'd like to close by saying I believe that, as we explore these higher states through our inner exercises like meditation, as we take the time to release stress from our nervous system and do those inner exercises, we not only deepen our understanding of our higher self, but more importantly, our connection to the universe. And so I really believe that you and I are far greater in our abilities when we align with the natural law, with the creative intelligence of our higher self. And in particular, what I'm talking about is when we connect with our soul, when we take that time to go inside and to meditate and to touch that deeper silence. And so as you and I close that gap between the higher self and the lower self, I believe that the possibilities of what we can accomplish is absolutely infinite and unstoppable. It's unbounded. And so if you found this video helpful and it resonated with you, I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit that like button, share with other people, and subscribe for more content. And let's continue to explore, things together in Inner Vision Life. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and continue to live an Inner Vision life. And I'll see you on the next video.